the EU and then eventually the United States, you mentioned Victoria Nuland, who had been Hillary Clinton's personal press secretary when she became a Secretary of State. And she's married to a leading neocon, the leader of the neocon movement in the United States, Robert Kagan. And she then kind of takes over. At that point, she's an assistant Secretary of State under Clinton. She actually goes to Ukraine and she's in the square with the protesters. Now, this is a big deal for the protesters because now they feel the full backing of the U.S. government. And she's actually handing out cookies to them. And then on our radio show, on our podcast, The Socialist Program, which is also available on Breakthrough News, we played the tape of Victoria Nuland talking to other members of the U.S. diplomatic entourage in Kiev right before the coup. And they're talking about who the next leaders of Ukraine should be. And one of them says, well, what about this guy who's in the far right? And what about this guy? And she said, no. And then the U.S. ambassador says, well, the EU thinks it should be this. And she says, and pardon my language, she says, fuck the EU. It's going to be Yats. It's going to be Yats. Yats is going to be the guy. Now, Yats is Yatsenyuk, who is a pro-U.S. sort of technocrat, financier guy. And they wanted him to be the new leader of Ukraine because he could connect more with the United States. And he wasn't tarnished by Nazism, right? So the coup happens, by the way, on February 21st, an agreement is signed. Germany's there. I think Poland's there. Russia's there. The United States is there. The opposition, including the mainstream opposition and the fascists and Yanukovych, they all there. They sign an agreement on February 21st. And the agreement is basically we agree to all the protesters' demands. We're going to have early elections, meaning Yanukovych will probably lose and somebody who's even more pro-EU will win. There's going to be a devolution of political authority away from the center into the regions. That's helpful because Ukraine is a demographically divided country. And Yanukovych says yes and agrees to pull the cops out of Maidan. That's the agreement. And the next day, absent a police presence, the fascists storm the parliament, disperse it. The president flees for his life. Victoria Nuland, John McCain say, this is a great day for Ukraine. This is the greatest day for Ukraine. This Nazi-led coup d'etat. Think about January 6th. This was January 6th on steroids because it actually dispersed the parliament and seized the power. And then now a government that was a transitional government under these far-right fascist forces says, look, Russia is now banned as an official second language. They make it clear that they're a Russophobe, hostile regime. They say we're going to come into NATO. And that's when the battle in the eastern part of Ukraine, what is Donetsk and Luhansk, and also Crimea, heats up because it's at that moment that the people in the East realize that this government is going to be with NATO and it's going to be anti-Russia and anti-Russian. And an armed struggle starts in the East. And that's when Putin decides the Black Sea naval base that Russia has in Crimea, which is their biggest base, is not going to be a NATO base with nuclear weapons against Russia. So that's when Putin says, I'm permitting the referendum, which of course is stage managed by the Russian military to have a referendum in Crimea. But most of the people in Crimea want to be with Russia. They're mostly Russian oriented or Russian people or Russian speaking. And so they vote overwhelmingly in the referendum. And that's considered to be the invasion by Russia. So would that have happened? Would Crimea have happened if it hadn't been for the coup? Would the coup have happened if it wasn't for the fascists using their muscle? Would the coup have happened if the different international signatories had agreed to the February 21st compromise? None of this would have happened. I say to the American peace movement and to the American people, if you're upset and angry about a war in Ukraine, which you should be, you should say that this is the fault of Victoria Nuland and John McCain and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and the State Department. The only thing that was different between then and now is President Barack Obama was a restraining force on the neocon forces within the U.S. government, because unlike what came later under Trump and Biden, Obama absolutely refused to send weapons to Ukraine after the coup because he knew that Russia would perceive that to be the beginning of the end for Russia, because it would mean that NATO was creating a de facto membership for Ukraine, even if it wasn't formally a member. That's kind of like an important part of this context.